Welcome, Stephen. It's such a pleasure to have you with us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Andrea.
Stephen, I have always admired what you do. You have co founded Million Peacemakers to teach people the art of peacemaking, which I find is so needed in the world that we live in. And I was wondering if you could share with our audience more about your mission behind the organization and the inspiration behind its creation, please.
Wow. Well, thank you for asking. The inspiration is that I didn't have these tools for constructive conflict resolution for relationships I cared about or longer term relationships. And the skills I learned and practiced in negotiation weren't as effective. As I found out, you cannot win a negotiation with your wife. You can't win a negotiation with your business partners. In my case, they were initially family members, or with the union. And I found over time that they were actually lose-lose or win-lose, which became lose-lose at the end of the day. And I thought there had to be a better way. I was a member, or am a member, of a group called YPO, which stood for Young Presidents Organization. I'm no longer young, but I'm still a member. They let you stay on after 50 now, and they call it YPO Gold. And I was the chair of education for the Canadian region, and I got buy-in from all 17 chapters in Canada to do an event on conflict resolution. So I figured I'd get an expert in conflict resolution because I was an expert in having conflict, not necessarily in resolving it. And by the way, I've been married 32 years, but 3 wives, so happily married the third time for 14 years now. But I had a bit of conflict until I got there. And come from a family business background, which had a fair amount of, well, a lot of conflict, and always was interested in geopolitical conflict from the time I spent 4 months in Israel when I was 15 years old. And I, again, thought I would get an expert to lead this event on conflict resolution in May 2012. And I bought a dozen books on the topic, and I'd spend my nights and weekends reading them. But I found they were very hard to get through. They were typically by PhDs for PhDs. And we need something very practical. None of us are going to read a 980-page handbook on conflict resolution when we have a conflict. Around that time, I was introduced to Dr. Amir Kafir from Israel, who had worked with our members in conflict zones such as Israelis and Arabs, Turks and Armenians, Greeks and Turks, Indians and Pakistanis. And he agreed to facilitate the event. And then we put together a team of academics and practitioners with the goal of coming up with a model that would be so simple it fits on the back of my business card, which you have here for those of you who have video, and so powerful it could work for any conflict, from an internal conflict to an identity-based conflict. And that's what led to what we call Nonflict. Actually, the word Nonflict was from a brainstorming session with my stepson, who came up with the word, and there's no word for resolved conflicts, so that's what we trademarked as our own. And that's a bit of the story.
Beautiful. So you also have a book called Nonflict, the art of everyday peacemaking, and it has been widely acclaimed. It has been also translated in multiple languages. And I was wondering if you could share with our audience some of the key principles of the Nonflict way.
So the key principles are, first, well, the 3 steps are to understand yourself and your partner, to understand our shared reality, and step 3 is to co-create our ideal reality. When we do a workshop, which is how we started, we spend the first half of the workshop on basic principles that are already out there, by the way. Nonflict is a compilation of positive psychology, change management, imago marriage therapy, and coaching in a step-by-step process, with use of active listening, which I taught back in McGill Organizational Behavior as a student-taught course in the late 70s. So we spend the first half understanding different ways of dealing with conflict, why we might act and feel the way we do, and why others might act and feel the way they do, to have empathy for the other, because conflict we often perceive as negative, but it's just 2 or more different perspectives coming in contact with each other. Is this glass half full or half empty? I see it half full, and my second wife saw it half empty. We had a lot of conflict around that, as an example. But we need different perspectives for innovation, for growth as individuals, organizations. And the purpose of the workshop is to give us tools to deal with conflict in a constructive way, so that it's not perceived as negative. So in step 1, we take the time to share our facts and feelings and listen to the other person's facts and feelings around the conflict. And we would actively listen to them and mirror back the essence of what we heard and ask, did I understand you well? And is there anything else? Usually when we're in conflict, we're just waiting for the other person to take a breath before we give our perspective and tell them they're wrong. So here we're allowing them to feel respected and understood without having to agree with them or disagree with them, but just the time that we take to listen to them builds trust. And especially when we are able to have empathy for the other person, even again, if we're not necessarily agreeing with them or disagreeing with them. And then we would ask what's important to them. And then we'd share and we actively listen to them and ask to understand, well, is there anything else? And we find that what's important to me is often important to you. In a relationship, we all want to feel respected, understood, have love, feel safe. And this is the same at work or the same at home and the same geopolitically. And we know that most conflicts happen when people feel disrespected. Wars are started when leaders feel disrespected. If we think of the conflicts we have in our own lives, often we would see that is at the root. And then we would, in step 2, understand our shared reality, discuss, well, what's the real underlying conflict here versus the symptoms of the conflict? Because if we don't deal with the real underlying conflict, we're not going to resolve it. It's going to keep coming back again and again. And the next question is what's working well for us? Because often when we're in conflict, we just think about the negative. If we take the time to appreciate or see what we appreciate about our partner, the person we're in conflict with, that puts us in a better frame of mind to resolve it. Next question is what's our worst case scenario if we cannot resolve it, and how would it feel? And people often need, as from change management, a real perceived crisis to take action toward change. So the worst case is we might grow further and further apart if it's a personal relationship or a business relationship. One or both of us gets fired, or I have to quit or fire you and find a replacement, which may or may not be better until they get up to speed. Or geopolitically, my kid might have to go to war with your kid. How would that feel? Pretty awful. Now we move to step 3 of Nonflict Way, which is to co-create, where we visualize what's our best case scenario and how would that feel? Then we discuss what are the obstacles to achieve our best case. And then we look at the obstacles and which of these can we control or influence. Of the ones we can control or influence, what could we do to overcome these controllable obstacles, followed by an action plan, who's going to do what and when. So those are the 3 steps of Nonflict. And when we do a workshop, people would use their real conflicts that they have. And we find that even if the person in the workshop is not with them at the same time, 85% of the conflicts are resolved just by putting ourselves in the shoes of the person we're in conflict with and answering those questions.
Can you share with us some of the most profound experiences that you have had in bringing Nonflict to communities, to organizations, to teams that maybe were deeply ingrained in conflict? And I know recently you just came back from a YPO event in Rwanda. Basically, that was also focused on the commemoration for the 30th anniversary of the genocide there. So I was wondering if you could just share with us some of those profound moments since you've been sharing your message about Nonflict with so many million people around the world.
Okay, I'll share with you the genesis of what led me to leave real estate. Then I'll share something that just happened in Rwanda. So I wanted to try it after the YPO event where we won the best leadership development award in the world. I said, let me try it with a tougher audience. So I decided to go to a Palestinian refugee camp, meet with these activist women on the other side of the wall. I'm a Canadian Jew, and I went with my wife and stepson, who was there for a year. And they started, the founder, an 84-year-old, whose bio says born in Jaffa, an ethnically cleansed city. And her first question to me was, you're from Canada. Your prime minister did not accept us as a state in the UN. What did the Palestinians do against Canadians? And she was pointing her finger very angrily at me. And my answer was, that's true. You're right. And by the way, everyone's right in a conflict, so you're right. Our prime minister did that. But I'm not a politician. I'm a business person that travels around the world, and all that I and the people I meet know about you is what we hear about in the media. Would you be willing to share your true stories that I could then share when I travel? So she said, okay. So we went around the table. There were 15 activist women through a translator. And I took them through those questions of Nonflict that I just mentioned earlier. And when we got to the last question, what could we do to overcome the obstacles? She came and hugged my wife and looked at me in the eye and said, "Thank you for being a friend to the Palestinians. We like what we learned, and we're going to use it with our husbands. But more importantly, we're prepared to meet 15 Jewish Israeli mothers. And if you could get Obama, Netanyahu, and Abbas in a room, we mothers won't let them out till there's a deal." So that's when I realized I had a gift to the world I needed to share. And that's when I left my career in real estate development to co-found Million Peacemakers. And that was 2014, just under 10 years ago. So fast forward, we started a youth initiative 2 years ago, led by youth, for youth, to train now 1 million youth in peacemaking this year in memory of the million lives that were lost 30 years ago in Rwanda. And the inspiration from their story, how they've been able to reconcile. And I've been to a reconciliation village where we have perpetrators and victims living together side by side. And how could that be possible when they were killing each other 30 years ago, or the Hutus were killing Tutsis with machetes, killing their neighbors 30 years ago. Now they're living in peace. And I had incredible stories. So the people that oversee the Rwandan Genocide Memorial are the organizations called the Aegis Trust. They, two sons of a Methodist minister, James and Stephen Smith, started a Holocaust center in the UK, in Nottingham. And when we are organizing our Global Impact Summit, where I was the co-chair just a few weeks ago, my co-chair, who's Rwandan, had introduced me to the Aegis Trust, and they reached out to me after Glenn Ford, the International Development Director, and said, "Steve, your email address is Million Peacemakers. That's kind of unusual for YPOer. Can we talk?" And then he mentioned it's the 30th anniversary where humanity allowed for 1 million lives to be lost in 100 days. Could we not train 1 million peacemakers in 100 days? And I thought that was a good idea. It's in our name. And I went to Nottingham 2 weeks later and met with James Smith, the co-founder, and Glenn and their team. And we agreed to collaborate on this global partnership for peace and humanity in partnership with the YPO Peace Action Network. Our chair was there, Sherwin Carson. I'm the past chair. And the youth of YPO's YNG were the initial collaborators. So when I was in Rwanda for this Global Impact Summit, I went a week earlier and we met with the government Ministry of Civic Engagement and Unity, and they agreed to be collaborators as well. So we had the government of Rwanda as part of our partnership. And then we met with the UN representative of Rwanda after that. So we're collaborating with them. Actually, we have a call tomorrow and every 2 weeks to plan on training 1 million Rwandans in peacemaking. So the Aegis Trust have been doing education, leading education programming on preventing genocide and living post-genocide for about 25 years. And I did a workshop for the educators there. Actually, I took their workshop and then I did a Nonflict workshop for them. And we are, which was great, is they really appreciated it and started using it right away with conflicts they were having, sometimes with each other. And there's a lot of respect for authority in Rwanda. That's part of the culture. And one person was having a conflict with her boss that she didn't want to talk about and he didn't know about. And it was great they resolved it. And we're incorporating in step 3 of Nonflict what we learned from Aegis is the power of forgiveness, and the power from Rwanda, the power of forgiveness. And when we have that question, what are the obstacles to achieve our ideal reality? Sometimes it's that one person didn't ask for forgiveness and the other person didn't forgive. So we're adding, where it's appropriate, forgiveness to our step 3 of Nonflict with the learning of Rwanda in there. And super powerful when we do that. Actually, I was reflecting and there was a conflict that I never resolved with one of my ex-wives. And I was thinking, why? And it's the person never asked forgiveness for something that they did. So that's a nice, powerful component that we learned from Rwandans that we're incorporating in Nonflict.
Wow. And when I listen to you speak about people coming together despite the past and the power of dialogue, the power of forgiveness, I want to ask you the question from your perspective. If we now add in to this mix joy, what role, in your view, does forgiveness, dialogue, joy play in achieving more peace in this world?
I think peace leads to joy. Having inner peace and peace with our neighbors leads to the ability to see more joy and feel more joy in life. When we have conflict that's built up that we're avoiding or dealing or not dealing with, it's hard to have joy. We have anger, we have bitterness, we have resentment, we have hurt, we have pain. Being able to free ourselves of that and realize that forgiveness is not for the perpetrator or the offender, it's for ourselves. It allows us to then be free to see joy and feel joy in the world. And there's so much joy that one can experience every day if we have the cloud lifted from us that is often one of anger and bitterness.
I agree. Do you actually believe that we could potentially one day achieve a zero conflict world in the future?
No, because conflict is normal and conflict isn't bad. So I'm not looking for zero conflict. I'm looking
Mhm.
for, and we're looking for giving people tools to deal with conflict constructively.
Mhm.
And unlike mediation, someone asked, is this mediation? No, because we're giving people tools to resolve their own conflict without us having to be there to mediate. And we're always going to have conflict, even internally, right? Internal conflict is a big part of our lives. And it's the same process, by the way, Nonflict, those 3 steps for an internal conflict or an external conflict. And conflict is fine. It's good. It's healthy. I'm hoping that one day we will have a lot less and eventually no destructive conflict where we're dealing with it in a way that'll hurt others.
Yes, let's hope for a better future.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen, I know in the past conversations that we have had, you shared how you have spoken at very prestigious international forums like the Vatican and also Columbia Business School. And I was wondering if you can share that story, even on how did the whole possibility of you even talking about what you do at the Vatican come about, and what were the key messages that you have conveyed and the key takeaways that have emerged from those experiences for you?
Thank you. So, like many of our inspirations, it came from a young person. One of our annual retreats, where we have the youth as part of our team, key parts of our team, and a young lady who had been married the year earlier said, it would have been great if my priest gave me and my fiance at the time these tools. And I thought that was a good idea. And this was in 2019. And it was, summer of 2018. So when she gave the idea, I saw that in September I was going to be in London. And I saw Rome, London as a 2-hour flight. So I put down to meet the Pope. I was going to be October 16th in London to meet the Pope on Monday the 15th. And so I visualized my ideal reality. And now what are the obstacles to achieve it? Is I'm a Jewish guy in Montreal and I don't know the Pope. So what could I do to overcome the obstacles? Is I called one of our board members, Laura, who's an Argentinian Catholic. And I said, Laura, do you know the Pope? She said, no, because Pope's Argentinian Catholic. And I said, okay, well, that didn't work. And I reached out. I wrote an email to the Pope. He didn't reply. But I'm pretty optimistic. And it was about a month before I had to make the trip, and I attended a cocktail party for our law firm. And everyone was there in a suit, but there was one gentleman with a brown robe and a cross. So I went up to him, and he was the Bishop of Montreal, Thomas Dowd, and I told him the idea that the young lady had. And he said, well, that's a good idea. I said, great. Do you know if the Pope's available? I have an opening October 15th. And he said, I'm sorry, there's a bishops conference all of October. And the Pope is going to be busy with that, but I'm going to be there. And I happen to know the Cardinal in charge of peace, Cardinal Turkson, the Cardinal in charge of families, Cardinal Farrell, and maybe they could help. So I signed a book for the bishop and each of the 2 cardinals, and I made my reservation to London because I saw the Pope was busy. But because I didn't have the appointment yet, I kept asking people if they knew the Pope. And my barber knows a lot of people. I said, Giovanni, you know the Pope? He said, come on, Steve, how would I know the Pope? Besides, he's Argentinian, I'm Italian. But it's so funny you ask, because the person whose hair I cut right before yours showed me a picture of his son meeting the Pope. Maybe he could help. So I called the father who introduced me to his son, Charles Small, who runs an NGO on anti-Semitism, actually. And he had been to the Vatican, and he introduced me to the person who runs his Rome office, Robert Hassan. And I spoke to Robert, and he said, Steve, your timing's great. The Vatican just asked me to help them on an event called Religions and the SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And maybe they would take you to be in the audience. There are 400 people in the audience. And I said, great, would I get to meet the Pope to share this idea with? He said, no, only the speakers meet the Pope. I said, well, what does it take to be a speaker? He said, well, you have to be a world-renowned religious leader or part of the UN, and you're neither. You'll be lucky if I get you in the audience. I said, okay, well, let me try anyway. So I sent an email on an homily that Father John, now the late Father John Walsh, wrote on the teachings of Nonflict related to the teachings of Jesus. And I also sent him some work we are doing on interfaith with Palestinian, Israeli, Jordanian, Syrian Master of Social Work students that I was working with them in Nonflict. They were at McGill. And Robert called me 2 weeks later and said, Steve, it's a miracle. They took you not only to be in the audience, but to be on the final panel on how religious leaders could use Nonflict to achieve the SDGs. Because what we found out was Cardinal Turkson, who had the book, was leading the conference on behalf of the Pope. And the two coincidences of talking to the barber and talking to the bishop led to being accepted and being invited to be on this final panel. And on that panel, by the way, when you speak at the Vatican, you have to present this speech in advance, a 10-minute speech timed that you have to read. Everyone just sits down and reads their speech. And I submitted my speech and was ready to deliver it. And the moderator of the panel was the secretary of the cardinal. And the person right before me, he was introducing, and he says, I'd like to now introduce you to Father, and I forget his name offhand, and he really wanted to be here. He submitted his speech 2 months in advance. I'm very sorry he passed away last week. And in his place, the church has sent this other father to read it. And people are now very hushed, and the person reading the speech is in tears. And my opening was going to be very uplifting, and now thinking, what do I do? And then the moderator introduces me. And rather than read the speech, I felt it would be inappropriate to just read it the way it was. So I stood up and said something along the lines of, we realize by the example of the father who passed away, none of us know how long we have in this world. And it's only through impacting and make the world a better place every single day that we will know that our life is really a life worth lived. And those aren't the exact words, but it was something along those lines. And then I continued on my story of how I came from being a traditional business person to a peacemaker. Anyway, so I didn't read it, and I was the only person in 3 days of conference who didn't read a speech. And then the secretary came up to me after and said, can you come back next month and talk to the advisory group of Pax Christi advising the Pope on peace and nonviolence? And I was the only Jewish person there with a bunch of bishops and priests and nuns and cardinals. So it was a great learning experience for me. And I guess the lesson is the power of visualization and then taking action to achieve that ideal reality. And then I think if the objective and the vision is a pure one, a good one, then the universe has a way of helping you.
Yes, so beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing your story. As you look back now on your life, and as you said, you were a successful businessman, you've really accomplished various things. And you now look back on everything you have accomplished, your experiences and your overall journey. What is the biggest source of joy, or what has been the biggest source of joy for you in the last couple of years, and today?
For me, the biggest source of joy is working with teams, and in particular youth, young people, in moving our mission forward, in seeing them get it and seeing them inspired and seeing them excited. They excite me and they give me energy, and the rest of our team, the older folks, energy and inspiration. They're not as jaded as we are, and to see them really spread it in ways that I wouldn't have thought possible, and just the ideas they came up with and the excitement of bringing this to Africa, with great leaders in Africa and in South America. And the book is in Spanish, and we have many Spanish speaking coaches and young people, and everywhere from Australia, everywhere I go, people get it. And it's just spreading. So that gives me joy to see that it's an idea that's taking off, that, as you mentioned earlier in the call, that's so needed today in our life, which is very polarized. The social media has a way of polarizing people on their algorithm, the media in general, to give people hope and that they are able to make a difference in their lives and those of others. So that gives me a lot of joy.
And how can someone that could be listening to our podcast today, that may have an interest in getting more involved and potentially even becoming a coach as part of the Million Peacemakers, what advice would you actually give those individuals to get more involved in the mission that you have?
Well, the more the better. We're looking for a million, and actually we're not stopping at a million. Our goal now is 250 million, which is 3.5% of the world, because studies have shown that 3.5% is an unstoppable force. And so they could reach out on our website. Our contact information is there. We have monthly Nonflict workshops, which are open to anyone. We have a Peace GBT that was created. If they want to try out Nonflict, it's trained in Nonflict, as well as a ALEXA skill, which is there, which take people through the workshop. I don't want to say her name, or she'll wake up and ask me how she could help resolve my conflict. There are a lot of ways to getting involved, and then to share it with others. So we're creating hub cities as well with our current partnership in different parts of the world, States, Canada, Europe, Australia, Africa, etc. So there are lots of ways of getting involved. Just to reach out to me or our executive director, John Moyle, Hecht at millionpeacemakers.org, HECHD, HECHD, and then we'll take it from there.
Wonderful. And with such an ambitious aspiration, can you tell us more, Stephen, about the time frame of reaching the 250 million? And what are some of the key milestones or objectives that would need to be accomplished in order to achieve that aspiration?
Well, the milestones are to create the platforms that people could both learn Nonflict in asynchronous way, 24/7, multilingual, and it's through collaborations that we're doing that. And we have a number of platform collaborators that we're working with. The other one is all through partnerships, which is SDG number 17, partnerships with youth organizations. So we're in discussions with the Scouts, and there are 57 million Scouts in the world. Junior Achievement, there are 17 million youth in Junior Achievement. Those are just two that I'm mentioning off the top of my head that we're in discussions with this week, and others. So it's identifying partners that we would collaborate with that lead to other youth, and or corporate partnerships to help fund the training. It's $10 a peacemaker to sponsor a training of peacemakers, and we'll bring Nonflict to your organization too if you have one. And this is how it started as the best leadership development award in the world for YPO out of 2,000 others, because we know that the average manager spends about 25% of their time dealing with conflict, and the average employee spends about 7% of their time dealing with conflict. So to give organizations the tools to do it. So it's really an omni-win that we're looking for with organizations, sponsors, youth organizations, and really 250 million sounds like a lot, but there are 6 large youth organizations in the world, and that's the number of youth that they have affiliated with them. So to me, it is an achievable, realistic goal.
Very, very inspirational, Stephen. And as a final question, if you were to leave our listeners with one piece of advice or a simple practice to bring more joy and peace into their lives, starting today, what would it be?
Taking the time to listen to someone with an open heart, open mind, making the gentle eye contact we have, letting them finish, and then mirroring the essence of what you heard and let them feel heard. And that will tend to bring you closer with your loved ones or people you work with and people you work with, people that you encounter. So give someone the joy, the gift of listening.
Without judgment, right? As you were
Without
saying
judgment,
earlier.
yes, which is really hard to do, we know, but just listening with an open mind, open heart to someone else, and that will bring you more peace right away, and bring the other people that you know come into contact with more closeness with you and more trust for you and more joy in their lives. When you give people joy, the joy of your attention, turn off your phone if you're having a serious discussion, turn it off. Wow, that shows a lot of respect. You could do that right away as well, and just give people the gift of your time and attention.
Well, thank you so much for this gift, Stephen. It's been an absolute delight to have you with us today to share your wisdom and insights and your journey so we can collectively contribute to bringing more joy and peace to this world. So, thank you so much.
No, thank you, Andrea. It's a pleasure and honor to spend this time with you, and you bring so much joy to the world. So keep bringing the joy that you are, and thank you for having me.